Hello, everyone. There was a time when Alzheimer's disease was spoken about in hushed tones, misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and surrounded by stigma. For decades, families were left with more questions than answers, and doctors were forced to rely on symptoms that often came too late. But something has changed, quietly, steadily, and with the combined force of science, technology, and global collaboration. We've entered a new phase, one defined not by uncertainty, but by possibility. The Alzheimer's fight is no longer stuck in neutral. It's accelerating, with breakthroughs in biomarkers, advances in artificial intelligence, and deeper insights into the biology of the disease. We now stand on the edge of a fundamentally new approach. This isn't just evolution, it's reinvention, and it's reshaping how we detect, treat, and even think about Alzheimer's. What comes next will depend not only on innovation in labs, but on how we work together as a global community to turn that science into solutions. For a long time, Alzheimer's disease was a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Scientists, doctors, and families all struggled with the same frustration. We could see the devastating effects, but we didn't fully understand the causes. It was like watching a building collapse without knowing where the foundation had failed. But now, after decades of painstaking research, the landscape is changing. Alzheimer's is no longer the enigma it once was. We're beginning to grasp the biology behind the disease in a way that gives us something we never had before: leverage, a clear path forward, the ability to move from reacting to planning. What's driving this shift isn't a single discovery, but a combination of breakthroughs that are converging. Genetics has helped identify key risk factors, like the APOE4 gene, and advances in molecular biology have revealed how plaques and tangles disrupt brain function. We've built tools that allow us to see what's happening in the brain years before memory loss begins. Blood-based biomarkers are now offering a window into early detection, and this is a game changer. If you can detect the disease earlier, you have a chance to intervene earlier, and that changes everything. We're no longer in the phase of asking what causes Alzheimer's. We're in the phase of figuring out how to act on what we know. That means testing new therapies, yes, but it also means changing how we approach diagnosis, how we build clinical trials, and how we think about public health. Up until now, the strategy was mostly about caring for people after symptoms appeared. But with this new wave of data, we can rethink the entire timeline. Prevention is no longer a vague goal. It's becoming a measurable, achievable one, and the strategy we define from here on out will depend on how well we can integrate science with systems. Science has shown us the path, but systems will determine if we walk it. That means we need infrastructure that supports early screenings. We need electronic health records that flag high-risk patients. We need more inclusive data sets that represent people from all backgrounds, not just one region or one income bracket, because Alzheimer's doesn't discriminate, and our strategy shouldn't either. Another major shift is how we think about risk. For years, Alzheimer's felt like a flip of the coin. Neither you got it or you didn't. But now, we're seeing that risk is a continuum. It can be measured. It can be influenced. It can be reduced. Lifestyle, vascular health, sleep, and even education levels are all part of the equation. The more we understand these levers, the more we can empower individuals and communities to take action before the disease takes hold. Of course, knowledge alone isn't enough. It has to lead to outcomes, and that's where leadership matters, not just from scientists and doctors, but from policymakers, investors, and advocates. There's a temptation to think the job is done because we've figured it out. But in reality, the hard work begins now. Defining a strategy isn't just about knowing what to do. It's about making sure the world is set up to do it. We need funding to scale promising diagnostics. We need regulations that support rapid iteration. We need global cooperation because no single country can solve this on its own. The truth is, we've never been more prepared to take on this disease. We have the data, we have the tools, and now, for the first time, we have a realistic chance to change the trajectory, not just for individuals, but for generations. That's not to say the road ahead will be easy. It won't be, but it will be purposeful. And for the millions of families who have lived with uncertainty, that purpose means something. This is a moment that calls for focus, for urgency, and above all, for commitment. Because when we look back a decade from now, we will either say this was when we turned the corner, or we'll regret that we didn't. The foundation has been laid. It's time to build. For decades, the diagnosis of Alzheimer's relied mostly on a process of elimination. Doctors would assess memory loss and cognitive decline, rule out other causes, and eventually land on the possibility of Alzheimer's, often too late for meaningful intervention. It was an imprecise and deeply frustrating process, both for the clinicians and the families affected. But that model is changing. The old playbook is being rewritten, not just edited. We're entering an entirely new era of Alzheimer's detection and diagnosis, one where tools like biomarkers and AI-driven technologies are moving us away from guesswork and toward precision. One of the most transformative developments has been the emergence of biomarkers that can detect the biological signatures of Alzheimer's years, sometimes even decades, before symptoms begin. These are not vague indicators. They are measurable changes in the brain and blood that tell a very clear story about what's happening long before a person forgets a name or misplaces their keys. Take beta, amyloid, and tau proteins, for example. These two markers have long been known to play a central role in the progression of the disease. Today, scientists can use PET scans, cerebrospinal fluid analysis, and even blood tests to track their accumulation with surprising accuracy. The ability to detect these biomarkers early offers something we never had before: time to intervene, time to plan, time to slow the disease's progression before it overtakes someone's life. AI is playing an equally vital role in this transformation. For a disease as complex and multifaceted as Alzheimer's, pattern recognition at scale is critical. Machine learning algorithms can now sift through vast amounts of imaging data, genetic profiles, and cognitive assessments to identify subtle changes that even trained specialists might miss. These systems don't just accelerate the diagnostic process. They make it more consistent, more scalable, and more accessible. AI can help bridge the diagnostic gap in regions where access to neurologists is limited. It can reduce disparities in care by making advanced tools available through digital platforms, not just elite research centers. The synergy between biomarkers and AI is especially powerful. Biomarker data can feed directly into AI models, improving their predictive accuracy and reducing false positives. This means we're not just diagnosing Alzheimer's earlier, we're doing it with a higher degree of confidence. In clinical settings, this could translate into earlier and more targeted treatments. In research, it enables better patient selection for clinical trials, ensuring that new therapies are tested on individuals at the right stage of disease. That's a key step toward developing treatments that don't just mask symptoms, but modify the course of the disease itself. And yet, the impact of these technologies goes beyond science. It's also deeply human. When people receive a diagnosis earlier, they're not just given more treatment options. They're given more agency. They can make informed decisions about their futures, their finances, their families. They can participate in clinical trials that may benefit them and help others. That kind of empowerment has been missing from the Alzheimer's narrative for far too long. we're also starting to see how these tools can be integrated into routine healthcare. Imagine going in for a standard checkup and receiving a simple blood test that alerts your physician to early markers of Alzheimer's risk. That data could then be analyzed by an AI system, which provides your doctor with a personalized risk profile and recommendations for next steps. It's a vision that feels futuristic, but not by much. The tools exist. The challenge now is to scale them responsibly, ensuring they are tested rigorously, implemented ethically, and made accessible to everyone, not just those who can afford cutting-edge care. Of course, technology is not a cure-all. These tools are only as good as the systems they operate within. If we don't build the healthcare infrastructure to support early diagnoses, if we don't train providers, protect patient data, and address the disparities in access, then even the most advanced diagnostics will fall short of their potential. But if we do this right, we'll be moving from a reactive model of care to a proactive one. We'll be catching the disease in its silent phase when interventions are most effective. We'll be equipping doctors and families with the information they need to make better choices sooner. What's happening now isn't just innovation, it's redefinition. The story of Alzheimer's is no longer limited to memory loss and late-stage care. It's becoming a story of early detection, precision tools, and empowered patients. And if we stay focused, if we invest wisely, and if we collaborate across sectors, this new chapter could be the one that finally turns the tide. Alzheimer's has always posed a daunting challenge, in part because for so many years, the focus was on managing symptoms rather than addressing the root of the disease. We were essentially trying to catch water from a leaking pipe without repairing the crack itself. But that's changing. Today, we're seeing a surge of investment aimed not at making people feel temporarily better, but at slowing, halting, or even preventing the disease at its biological origin. It's a shift in mindset that's long overdue, and one that's being backed by unprecedented momentum from both the scientific and funding communities. The truth is, this acceleration didn't happen overnight. It was the result of decades of foundational research that often didn't get headlines but quietly built the knowledge base we're now standing on. Scientists spent years mapping out the cascade of events that unfold in the brain long before symptoms appear. They discovered the roles of beta, amyloid plaques, and tau tangles, two key culprits in the neuronal damage characteristic of Alzheimer's. More recently, we've learned that neuroinflammation and vascular dysfunction also play significant roles. And with each of these discoveries, new doors opened for therapeutic intervention. What's exciting now is how those discoveries are being translated into action. Drug development pipelines are fuller than they've ever been, with dozens of experimental treatments in various stages of clinical trials. Some of these are monoclonal antibodies designed to clear amyloid plaques from the brain. Others target tau protein aggregation or modulate immune system responses to reduce inflammation. There are even approaches focused on protecting synapses or promoting neuronal regeneration. The diversity of strategies being pursued reflects just how multifaceted this disease is, and how many angles we now understand well enough to target directly. One of the most promising shifts is the movement toward treating the disease earlier in its progression, or even before clinical symptoms emerge. This is a profound change from past approaches that started treatment only after significant cognitive decline. The logic is simple. If you can intervene during the silent phase of the disease, when brain changes are just beginning, you have a much better chance of altering its course. And thanks to earlier diagnostics, that kind of timing is now feasible. Investments are increasingly focused on therapies tailored for this critical window, and that's where the hope of real impact lies. There's also a growing realization that Alzheimer's isn't a one-size-fits-all disease. Genetic differences, lifestyle factors, and environmental exposures all shape how it develops and progresses. That understanding is leading to a more personalized approach to treatment. Some clinical trials now stratify participants based on biomarkers or genetic markers like APO status, which makes it easier to evaluate whether a given therapy works better for specific populations. This kind of precision medicine is something we've seen transform other fields, oncology being a prime example, and now it's finally coming to neurology. But while the science is advancing rapidly, what's just as important is the financial commitment that's following it. We're seeing more governments, philanthropic organizations, and private sector partners directing funding into this space than ever before. And crucially, many of these investments are designed to support not just drug development, but also the infrastructure around it. Things like faster regulatory pathways, clinical trial networks, and real-world evidence platforms. Because getting a drug approved is only half the battle, making sure it reaches the people who need it at the right time is the rest of the equation. There's still a lot of work to do. Not every promising therapy will succeed. Some will fail in late-stage trials, and others will reveal side effects we didn't anticipate. But that's the nature of innovation. Progress often happens through persistence, not perfection. What matters is that we're no longer standing still. We're learning faster, we're investing smarter, and we're building a pipeline of solutions rather than waiting for a silver bullet. For the millions of people around the world who live under the shadow of this disease, whether they're patients, caregivers, or those who simply worry about what the future might bring, this new wave of therapeutic investment offers something that's been in short supply: hope. Not just hope that someday we'll cure Alzheimer's, but hope that we can change the experience of it in the near term, slow it down, buy time, preserve memories, protect independence. That's a future worth working toward. And thanks to the pace and direction of investment today, it's finally within reach. When people think about breakthroughs in Alzheimer's, they tend to picture cutting-edge science, novel therapies, new diagnostic tools, AI-driven predictions. And there's no question that these innovations are reshaping our understanding of the disease. But the truth is, none of it will matter unless we build the systems to deliver those breakthroughs where and when they're needed. The real impact won't come just from the science itself. It will come from how well we design, scale, and sustain the infrastructure around it. That's the difference between a promising discovery and a public health solution. What's becoming clearer with every step forward is that technology alone can't solve this problem. It's not enough to have a blood test that detects Alzheimer's early if people don't have access to routine care that includes cognitive screening. A new treatment that slows disease progression is only useful if it reaches patients at the right stage, something that requires coordinated diagnosis, awareness, and follow-up. Even the most effective drug becomes meaningless in a system where there are delays in approval, bottlenecks in insurance coverage, or gaps in provider training. In other words, we can't treat this disease in isolation. It's deeply embedded in a web of social, economic, and policy systems that either support success or undermine it. One of the most urgent systemic challenges is access. Right now, there are significant disparities in who gets diagnosed early, who gets enrolled in clinical trials, and who ultimately benefits from new treatments. In many parts of the world, and even within wealthier nations, Alzheimer's goes unrecognized or misdiagnosed until it's too late to intervene. This isn't just a failure of medicine, it's a failure of systems. We need to build more equitable models of care that reach rural populations, low-income communities, and underrepresented groups who have historically been left out of research and health care planning. And that means investing in everything from transportation and broadband to culturally competent training for healthcare workers. Workforce is another critical area. As diagnostic tools become more advanced and treatments more precise, we're going to need a generation of providers who are trained not just in geriatrics or neurology, but in the nuances of brain health, early detection, and family-centered care. That's not something that happens automatically. It takes policy change, it takes education reform, it takes long-term planning and funding. If we don't create the pipeline of professionals now, we'll be looking at a future where the science has outpaced the ability to apply it, something that's already beginning to happen in some places. Then there's data. We talk a lot about AI and machine learning, but those tools only work if we have high-quality, diverse, and real-time data to feed into them. That requires interoperability, health systems talking to each other, sharing information in a secure and standardized way. It also requires ethical frameworks that protect patient privacy while allowing for innovation. These are not just technical questions, they are governance challenges. They require alignment across public and private sectors, across countries, and across industries that haven't historically worked together. And we can't overlook the importance of caregiver support. Alzheimer's doesn't just affect individuals, it affects families, workplaces, communities. Any systemic solution must include strategies for respite care, mental health support, financial assistance, and education for those providing unpaid care. Right now, too many caregivers are navigating this journey alone without guidance or relief. The system has to recognize them not as afterthoughts, but as central to any strategy that hopes to succeed. Regulatory reform is another lever we need to pull. Right now, it can take years for a new treatment to go from the lab to a patient. That timeline is often appropriate for ensuring safety and efficacy, but it can also be unnecessarily slow or fragmented. We need frameworks that reward innovation while also allowing for flexibility, especially for diseases like Alzheimer's, where the clock is always ticking. That includes adaptive trial designs, fast-track pathways, and reimbursement models that support long-term outcomes rather than short-term savings. The bottom line is this: the science is moving faster than the systems. And if we don't close that gap, we risk squandering some of the most promising advances we've ever seen in the fight against this disease. Systemic progress isn't as flashy as a new drug or a headline-grabbing trial result, but it's what ultimately determines whether lives are changed. It's what turns knowledge into impact, and that's where our focus needs to be. Because when we finally look back and ask what made the biggest difference in turning the tide against Alzheimer's, the answer won't be a single breakthrough. It will be the systems that allowed many breakthroughs to work together, for everyone, everywhere, every time. If there's one thing the last few decades have taught us, it's that science doesn't happen in a vacuum. The days of lone researchers making world-changing discoveries in quiet corners are long gone. The problems we face today, especially something as complex and global as Alzheimer's, require a different model. They demand shared knowledge, pooled resources, and synchronized efforts. The next decade in the fight against this disease won't be defined by breakthroughs emerging from isolated labs. It will be defined by how well we collaborate across borders, disciplines, and sectors. Alzheimer's isn't confined to one geography, income level, or population group. It touches nearly every country, and its prevalence is growing fastest in regions that are least equipped to manage it. That reality makes a strong case for treating this as not just a medical challenge, but a global one. No single government, research institution, or biotech company can solve it alone. It's going to take collective ambitions, scientific and political, to drive meaningful progress. Collaboration isn't just a nice to have, it's a necessity. One of the clearest examples of this already taking shape is in data sharing. Researchers around the world are now contributing to global databases of brain scans, genetic profiles, and cognitive assessments. These repositories allow scientists in one part of the world to build on work being done in another. They help AI models learn from more diverse populations, improving their accuracy and equity. When data is siloed, progress slows. When it flows freely, with the right privacy protections and ethical frameworks, it becomes a force multiplier. What we're seeing now is the early architecture of a global brain health network, and that has the potential to dramatically accelerate discovery. But it's not just scientists who need to work together. Policymakers, regulators, and public health leaders also need to align. One country's breakthrough treatment won't change much if another country doesn't have the system in place to deliver it. That's why it's so important to develop shared regulatory standards that speed up approval without compromising safety. It's also why we need international financing mechanisms to ensure that lower-income countries can access diagnostics and therapies. Equity is more than a moral imperative, it's a strategic one. If we want the science to reach its full potential, it has to reach everyone. This kind of alignment also needs to extend to clinical trials. Too often, trials are conducted in a narrow slice of the global population, which means we don't know how well a drug or therapy will perform across different genetic backgrounds, cultures, or health systems. But with coordinated planning, trials can be more inclusive. They can be structured to generate insights that are globally relevant. And that means the therapies we develop won't just work in theory. They'll work in the real world across real diversity. There's also a tremendous opportunity for collaboration between the public and private sectors. Governments can fund foundational science, support infrastructure, and create favorable policies. Private companies can bring speed, focus, and scale to product development. But the magic happens when these two sectors align around common goals. We've seen this model work in global health before HIV, malaria, and vaccines are just a few examples. There's no reason Alzheimer's shouldn't benefit from the same kind of coordination. Technology companies have a role to play, too. From cloud-based data storage to machine learning platforms, tech is increasingly woven into every stage of the research and treatment pipeline. But for these tools to reach their potential, they need to be built and deployed in ways that are interoperable and scalable. That means tech firms, healthcare providers, and academic researchers need to be in constant dialogue, not competing, but complementing each other's efforts. The disease is too complex, and the need is too urgent for fragmentation. Of course, global collaboration isn't easy. It requires navigating different legal systems, funding mechanisms, and cultural approaches to healthcare. It demands transparency, patience, and a willingness to share credit, but if we can overcome those barriers, the payoff is enormous. We'll learn faster, we'll waste less, we'll deliver more treatments, more hope, more impact. The world is more connected than it's ever been. That connectivity can be a distraction, or it can be an asset. In the fight against Alzheimer's, it must be an asset. We need to treat scientific knowledge the way we treat other global priorities, as something that gains value when it's shared, when it moves, when it multiplies. The most important discoveries of the next 10 years may come from anywhere. But their power will come from being connected to everything. That's the path to real progress, not the isolated spark, but the collective fire. If this next phase of the Alzheimer's fight teaches us anything, it's that no one wins alone. Not the researchers, not the caregivers, not the families, and certainly not the patients. Progress will come from connection across borders, disciplines, and perspectives. We have the science, we have the tools, and now we have the momentum, but we can't afford to treat this as a slow march forward. We need to move with urgency and coordination, because every day we delay is a day someone loses a memory they'll never get back. This is the decade where we change the story, not just for a few, but for everyone, everywhere. The next phase is here, and we're ready.